How's it going out there, everybody? This is Marq Burnett, Alabama beat writer for SEC Country. You can follow me on Twitter at Marq_Burnett. That's at MARQ_BURNETT. Read all my work, obviously, at SECCountry.com/Alabama. I want to check in with you guys here on Wednesday night. Just kind of give some updates on the latest news out of Tuscaloosa. Sort of get you ready for the game one last time. Before we sort of wind down here and head over to Oxford in a couple of days. Obviously, reporters got to speak to Nick Saban tonight over in Tuscaloosa. And, Nick Saban, he was kind of, on Monday, I think I talked to you guys, I said he was kind of chill. Today, he was a little bit more on edge, a little bit more fired up. You can tell that, the coaching staff has been getting after the players this week, sort of ramping things up, not wanting a repeat of what happened last week against Western Kentucky. In terms of the effort, different things like that. I think, the leadership group was sort of getting after the younger guys as well, holding everybody accountable. And Nick Saban said that, this week of practice has been a lot better than last week. And he said they're trying to clean up some of those little things like penalties, other things like that, so that they don't have any of that carryover to the big-time matchup coming up against Ole Miss over in Oxford this weekend. Obviously, I'm sure you know, but just in case you don't, kickoff is at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 2:30 Central Time on CBS. So Uncle Vern and Gary will be on the call for you guys. I know you Alabama fans love Uncle Vern and Gary, so should be an exciting matchup. Both teams are going to be locked in for this one. Obviously, Ole Miss wants to get back to their winning ways and prove that the Florida State game isn't who they really are. Alabama wants to sort of end the streak against Ole Miss. And show that, that they are the kings of college football again. A couple of newsworthy items coming out of Nick Saban's press conference tonight. The biggest news was, talking about the offensive line. He was asked about who's going to play left guard, who's going to play right guard. And Nick Saban said, they haven't settled on who's going to play the offensive guard position. So at this point, Ross Pierce-Baker is working at left guard, and Alphonse Taylor was working at right guard. And also Lester Cotton was getting some work, rotating in at left guard as well. So, based on what Saban said, I would take that to mean that, Ross and Alphonse are going to get the start at those two guard positions. Ross started at left guard all season last year, all 15 games. And Alphonse Shank Taylor started all 15 games last year at right guard for the national championship team. So Nick Saban said that their experience is going to help them in this game. And that's going to be key because Ole Miss's front, they like to do a lot of movement and be very disruptive up front and keep offensive lines off guard. So I think having two experienced players, two guys who sort of been there, done that, will help Alabama's offensive line. The last thing you want to do is be struggling with communication and different things like that when you're in a hostile environment. Obviously, it's going to be loud over there, 60,000 plus in Vaught Hemingway Stadium. So I think Saban is going to go with the two experienced guys. And I think they're going to continue to work with Lester Cotton. He's obviously a talented player, but he just doesn't have as much game experience as the other two. So I think they're going to side with Ross at left guard and Alphonse Shank Taylor at the right guard spot. See a few questions coming in here. A lot of Roll Tides, obviously. Let's see what we got. What's up, my man from Ryan Langley? What's up to you? Blake Johnson says, so are we going to start the freshman? I'm assuming the freshman is Jaylin Hurts. Yes, he's going to make his first road start over in Oxford. I was going to get to him later, but I can go and talk about him right now. Another thing that Nick Saban said tonight, he was asked about, Jaylin Hurts and how he thinks he'll handle the road environment. And Nick Saban came out and said, he said one of the things that he likes about Jaylin is the fact that he's so poised. He just moves on to the next play. He doesn't get down. He doesn't get frustrated or anything like that. So he has a ton of confidence in himself. And that's high praise coming from Nick Saban about a freshman, because a lot of times you see guys, make a bad throw or miss an assignment and they get down on themselves, but not Jaylin Hurts. I mean, he's a guy who continues to bounce back, and I think his poise and leadership, different things like that have been what have separated him in his competition. We talked to guys like Jonathan Allen and O.J. Howard, a bunch of the other leaders on this Alabama team, and and all those guys have said that Jaylin has been stepping up, showing leadership. Jonathan Allen said he can already hear Jaylin telling the offensive line where to be, telling people where to line up and telling everybody what to do. So when it comes from an alpha dog like Jonathan Allen, it's true. I mean, Jaylin Hurts, I think, you just watch his demeanor on the field. He just never gets rattled. I mean, he's a guy who goes out there and plays the next play, doesn't worry about anything other than just sort of executing his assignment. Obviously, it's a work in progress in terms of getting him knowledge of the system and different things like that. But one of the things you can't question is his poise, his leadership, and just sort of his overall confidence. And I think he'll be fine in a tough road environment. I think Alabama and the offensive staff, starting with Lane Kiffin, they're going to have a good plan to sort of put him in the right positions to be successful. And I think he'll be just fine in that tough environment on Saturday. Who's the starting running back for Ole Miss? That's a good question. Ole Miss's running game is kind of suspect in my opinion. I think what they try to do is, use their receivers, use the sort of side-to-side passing game to get their running game going. They don't necessarily try to line up and run it straight at you like Alabama will, but what they like to do is sort of run a lot of run-pass options to where the quarterback, Chad Kelly, is sort of reading what the defense does. If the linebackers cheat up, maybe he pulls the ball away from the running back and throws it over the top to a receiver, or if the linebackers sort of take a step or two back, he'll give it to the running back and just kind of stay ahead of the chains. They like to use their running game to really stay ahead of the chains, not necessarily for it to be the focal point of their offense, but more or less, just so that they don't get too far behind the down and distance. So I think the biggest key is going to be, when Alabama's pass rushers get after Chad Kelly, is not getting pushed past him and keeping him in that pocket, because he's a guy who can scramble out. If it's 3rd and 8 or something like that, he's a guy who can pick up 9 yards and pick up a first down. And if you're Alabama's defense, that's the last thing you want to happen, to have everything covered up and then have Kelly sort of escape out of the pocket and pick up a big first down there. Denny Ashley asks, do we see more of B.J. Emmons this week? That's a good question. I think the top 2 guys are Damian Harris and Bo Scarbrough. And then, beyond that, I would say B.J. Emmons is a 3rd guy, but I'm not sure he's past those other 2 guys. I think it'll all depend on how Ole Miss is trying to defend Alabama. If they stack the box, I think we'll see Alabama sort of throw to set up the run. I think Alabama's really going to try to get the ball to the receivers, because I don't think Ole Miss's secondary is going to be able to hold up. I think Ole Miss's defensive front is really good. They got some really good playmakers on the defensive line at linebacker. But I think their secondary can be exposed. If you look at that Florida State game, Florida State's quarterback, DeAndre Francois, threw for like 400 yards. I mean, that's a lot of yards against anybody, let alone an SEC defense. So I think, Alabama, we could see Alabama sort of throw to set up the run here. Let's see what else we got. Get the running game. Bobby Beach says, what's going on with Bo? Seemed like he can't get it going. We actually talked to Saban about that tonight, and he made an interesting point. He said that if you had high expectations for Bo, then maybe you're a little bit disappointed in his performance. But he said the coaching staff isn't disappointed. They're still working with Bo. They know he has a ton of potential. I think a lot of times, and we all fall victim to this. We see the recruiting rankings. He's a 5-star player coming out of high school, and you just look at him. He's 6'2", 240. People got caught up in the hype of him being sort of a Derrick Henry clone and thought he could duplicate some of that success that Henry had last year. But that's just not realistic to expect anybody else to do anything even similar to that. At this point, Damian Harris is just a more complete running back at this point in their career. Bo Scarborough, he's sort of developing. He's still coming along. But another thing to remember with him as well is that last year he had that knee injury. So, that sort of hurt his development, hurt his time in practice and different things like that. So I think Bo will be fine as long as the offensive line continues to gel and he continues to work at it. But, I think people need to realize that Damian Harris is the future back here, and Bo Scarborough is the number 2 guy. Leon Merritt Moore says, do you think Bama is intimidated by Ole Miss due to the last 2 wins by OM? I don't think so at all. I think Alabama's locked in for this game. I think they'll be ready. I mean, the players we've talked to have said that they're fired up for this one. I mean, I know it's cliche. A lot of the players try to go to that, we treat every game like this, like it's just another game. But I don't think that's the case this week. I mean, last year Alabama won a national championship, but the only loss on their schedule was to Ole Miss. And I know these players want to sort of put that behind them and beat Ole Miss, especially on the road, to show rest of the college football world that Ole Miss doesn't have a hold on them. I think they're going to come out fired up. It'll be interesting to see how they sort of channel that emotion early on because, it's going to be a loud atmosphere over there. I mean, I remember going over there 2 years ago. It's a great atmosphere. It's not the biggest stadium, but, their fans are right there on top of you. They get loud and they're into the game. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how Alabama sort of responds to that. Greg and Chrissy Harris say if the O-line can get the running game going, we will be fine. Yeah, that's a good point. I think, the offensive line has to figure out what they're doing on the interior. Nick Saban said tonight that he thought both of the offensive tackles, Cam Robinson and the freshman Jonah Williams, have played really well, but they got to figure out what they're doing on the interior. And that comes from, rotating guys. Obviously, Alphonse Taylor was suspended for that season opener versus USC, so they're trying to work him back into it. They're trying to figure out, are you going to put Ross at left guard or do you leave Lester there? So, a couple of question marks. I think Bradley Bozeman is settled at center, but the two guard spots are still sort of up in the air at this point, which can lead to a little bit of struggles in terms of, just knowing where to be and executing and things like that. But I think they'll figure it out here soon. Let's see what else we got. Yeah, Denny Ashley says if Alabama controls the turnover margin, they win easy. That's a great point. I mean, Alabama, turned the ball over 5 times in last year's game. You obviously have to give credit to Ole Miss for taking advantage of those turnovers. They still had to go out there and score points, and they forced a lot of those turnovers. But, I mean, how many times have you seen a Nick Saban coached team turn the ball over 5 times in one game? And the crazy thing is they still had a chance to win that game, at the end. So I think they'll definitely be more careful with the football this time around and not take as many risks. A lot of those turnovers were sort of, 2 were on special teams, a few interceptions that, just head-scratching throws. So I think Lane Kiffin will call a better game this year and not put the quarterbacks in a tough situation. I think they put Jake Coker and Cooper Bateman in some tough spots last year in that game, and then both quarterbacks also forced some errant throws. So I think they'll try to avoid that this year. Let's see what we got. Daryl Norfleet says, how has the coaching staff prepared the freshman QB for his first on the road SEC game? Yeah, I talked about that a few minutes ago. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that helped Jaylin Hurts win this job was the fact that he's so poised, he's so calm. You don't see that a lot for 18-year-olds who are fresh out of high school, but this kid just has a different type of confidence about him. I mean, he just walks around. It's his team at this point. I mean, you got seniors looking to him to sort of lead them, and I think this is a guy who could. I mean, if he stays here all 4 years and starts all 4 years, I mean, just imagine what he can do to Alabama's record books. I mean, we saw what A.J. McCarron did in his 3 years, sort of rewrote the history books, and I think Jaylin could, even top that. I mean, if you look at this defense he has that he's going to be able to play with, this is the perfect year for Alabama to be breaking in a freshman quarterback because you have a defense that's so elite. Obviously, you'd rather have a much better running game, but I think they'll figure that out, once they settle on the offensive lineman. But I think in terms of, being ready to play, I think Hurts will be ready to play. He's a poised guy. He'll settle in early. I'm not worried about his jitters. It's just going to be a matter of Lane Kiffin calling a good game and not putting him in the situations where he could, maybe force a turnover. I think they're going to try to shrink the field a good bit, maybe roll him out, have him only read half the field, and try to take advantage of, the matchups. And if Ole Miss, leaves a corner, leaves some one-on-one coverage with Calvin Ridley or Darius Stewart, I think Lane Kiffin's really going to try to exploit that. So, I mean, that's a good luxury if you're Alabama is you have 2 wide receivers who are go-to guys in Calvin Ridley and Darius Stewart. Hale Holloway says, will a pass rush be able to get to Kelly? That's a good question because, obviously Alabama has an elite pass rush, but if you watch how Ole Miss likes to play, they really try to get the ball out of Kelly's hands pretty quick. So it's just going to be a matter of whether or not Alabama can get them in obvious sort of drop-back passing situations where it's, 3rd and 7 or longer. Like I mentioned earlier, Ole Miss likes to use their running game and sort of their horizontal passing game to push the ball up the field and get positive yards on first down. So if they pick up 2 or 3 yards on first and second down, then maybe it'll be a little bit tougher for the pass rushers to get there. But if Alabama can lock them into some 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 8s on a consistent basis, I definitely think they'll get there. One of the things, in watching Ole Miss's game against Florida State, they really showed that they'll give up, some sacks. Florida State had 6 sacks in that game. And so I think a guy like Jonathan Allen sees that offensive line and he's licking his chops. I mean, you got Jonathan Allen, Tim Williams, Ryan Anderson, a ton of those guys. So I think Alabama's pass rush will be able to get there. Jeremy Milan, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing these names, but it says, any word on Raekwon Davis? Will he play? Yeah, Raekwon was actually eligible last week. He played some at the end against Western Kentucky. The problem with Raekwon is that, with his eligibility sort of being up in question before the first game, Alabama wasn't able to continue to work him in the game plan. So now they're sort of trying to work him back to the game plan and figure out where he can have a role. So now that he's sort of eligible and he'll have a full week of practice, I think he could contribute down the line because they're going to need some depth. He's a really big kid, obviously 6'7", 315. He's been playing some defensive end out there, so look for him to have a bigger role as the season sort of progresses along. Daryl Norfleet says, where's Rashaan Evans? Raekwon, I already talked about Raekwon, but Rashaan Evans, he's out there. He's in that sort of second wave of defensive linemen. You got to think, guys. You got Jonathan Allen starting at one defensive line spot. You got Dalvin Thompson starting at the other, and then you got Deron Payne starting at the middle. And then Alabama usually brings in an outside linebacker, sort of that fourth down lineman. But Rashaan Evans playing a good bit. He's just behind guys who are more experienced and probably better at this point of their career. So I think he's going to be a good player. I think he's still going to have a good career here at Alabama, but he's just behind guys like Jonathan Allen and Dalvin Thompson at this point. Last question here. Denny Ashley says, will Alabama have a spy on Kelly most of the game? I think we could see a guy like Rashaan Evans in that role. I think he really thrives in that role. If you go back and watch the Clemson game against Deshaun Watson, we saw Rashaan Evans sort of play that spy role. And with his speed and athleticism, he's a great guy to have in that role because, if the pass rushers are able to push Kelly to one side or the other, Evans could really show off his closing speed. So I think we could see a spy on Kelly at certain points in the game because, like I said, the last thing Alabama wants Kelly to do is sort of break away and pick up a key first down on 3rd and long or something like that. So that's my time. I appreciate you guys asking the question. I appreciate all the feedback. I'll try to check in with you guys again after the game. If anybody's going to the game, give me a shout out on Twitter. You can follow me there. At Marq Burnett, at MARQ_BURNETT. Obviously, read all of my work at SECcountry.com. I appreciate you guys for taking the time, and have a good night.